Well, you'll be glad to hear today's public inquiry was a lot calmer and quieter than yesterday. Arriving a couple of minutes late, the atmosphere felt somewhat subdued, almost watchful. Certainly everyone was on their best behaviour. Straight away we returned to the subject of noise. So you might remember yesterday I explained how we finally got to speak towards the end of the morning and make our points about what had been discussed by the applicant and FODC. And now this morning, the other side's barrister Beattie and their expert witness Keegan set about rebutting those arguments that we made yesterday morning. But before all that though, we got to hear Emmett correcting claims made by Dalradian yesterday as to the proximity of Gerald Hollywood's house to the mine. This is not the first time that third parties have had to correct the applicant's often willful, erroneous information, and we have to be very vigilant. As I explained in podcast number 71 about barrister methodology, it is often not what barristers say that matters most, but what they choose not to say. Their omissions can be just as revealing and sometimes more significant than their spoken arguments. Mr. McAvoy, barrister, appearing on behalf of the Silent Majority Group, which, like its counsel, has featured only sparingly during the inquiry, then rose to read a statement from one of its members. It was, after all, important to remind everyone that he was still there. For those unfamiliar with the inquiry, this provides an opportunity to introduce another third-party group that has featured from time to time, the Silent Majority. The group possesses two particular remarkable characteristics. The first is that the opening half of its name is entirely accurate. We almost never hear from them. Indeed, its public appearances are generally limited to the occasional letter in the local newspaper, usually penned by an individual associated with Dalradian, who identifies himself as the group's chair. The second remarkable feature is its use of word majority. One suspects there may have been a mix-up somewhere between majority and minority, an understandable mistake, perhaps, when one considers that many of the group's most visible supporters appear to be either employees of Dalradian or closely connected to those who are. On the other hand, perhaps Silent Minority might have simply lacked the same marketing appeal. Another contribution came from a member of the Silent Majority who read a prepared statement in support of the mine. Unfortunately, the statement appeared to have little connection to the question that had actually been asked. Even after the commissioners pointed out that he was not addressing the question, he pressed on regardless, returning faithfully to the content of his statement. It was rather like watching a train continue along its scheduled route after being informed that the tracks had ended several miles earlier. To be fair, the statement was delivered with admirable consistency. The answer never changed, bearing only the slightest superficial relationship to the question in the first place. The appearances of two representatives of the Silent Majority on the same day was an extraordinary development. Had a third appeared, the inquiry might have had to adjourn to consider the implications. Moving swiftly on, as they say. The remainder of the morning was taken up with discussions on noise-related matters, particularly the rebuttals, before we eventually moved on to the dreaded conditions. My conclusion from all of this is that if this mine is approved, it will surely be the most extraordinary mine ever developed. According to the evidence we have heard, virtually nothing associated with it will have any meaningful impact on anyone or anything. Construction phase will have negligible effects. The operational phase will have negligible effects. The noise from the plant will be negligible. The noise from the traffic will be negligible. The cumulative effects of all these negligible impacts, when combined together, will apparently remain negligible. The heavy goods vehicle movements will, it seems, glide silently through the countryside, creating neither disturbance nor annoyance. Blasting operations will be so carefully managed that they will scarcely be noticed. Dust will be controlled. Vibration will be controlled. Light pollution will be controlled. Visual impacts will be controlled. The power lines will have limited or no effect. The haul roads will have limited or no effect. The processing plant will have limited or no effect. Even the inevitable, unforeseen events appear destined to have limited or no effect. Indeed, after weeks of hearing that impacts will be negligible, one begins to wonder whether baseline data is really necessary at all. Why measure existing conditions when every future effect is confidently predicted to be insignificant? And should any concerns somehow arise, we are repeatedly assured that they will be addressed through monitoring, management plans, mitigation measures, conditions, oversight mechanisms, review procedures, reporting arrangements, and where necessary, self-reporting by the very organisations responsible for the activity in question. Listening to the evidence, one could be forgiven for thinking that this is not a conventional gold mine at all, but rather some remarkable new variety of mine that produces ore, traffic, blasting, industrial processing, waste rock, power infrastructure, and thousands of vehicle movements while leaving scarcely a trace of its existence. It is real magic. Or perhaps it's a rare species of mine, previously unknown to science. Impactus negligibilis, the invisible mine that does everything and affects nothing. And to finish off, just before we broke for lunch, Mary Brawley read out the following. It was a short application for Mr. McAleer's readmission. To quote, "It concerns the blanket nature of the exclusion ordered yesterday, which we say is disproportionate and requires urgent reconsideration. A blanket exclusion of this scope is a severe measure. Number one, we believe that the context of yesterday's events is critical, as Mr. McAleer's intervention arose in response to what appears to be a reluctance to permit a third-party expert witness to give evidence, and was at risk of being excluded. This taking place against the background of the lack of Wi-Fi access for the third parties. The proper course is to hear evidence and assess weight, not to exclude it outright, and Mr. McAleer's intervention was therefore an attempt to ensure a fair evidential process. And number two, we believe that it cannot justify his complete exclusion for the duration of the inquiry. That is an exceptional step, and one which requires clear and compelling justification. We submit that no such justification arises here. Less restrictive measures are available. We submit that there's a clear issue of fairness and proportionality. Excluding Mr. McAleer, who sought to ensure that relevant evidence is heard, risks narrowing the evidential picture and undermining the robustness of the inquiry's conclusions. I also emphasise that Mr. McAleer is in his mid-70s with some 40 years involvement in opposition to gold mining, including 15 years in relation to Dalradian. He brings experience capable of assisting the inquiry. He brings long-standing, informed and relevant experience to the issues before this inquiry. His exclusion, therefore, deprives the Commission of a valuable and informed perspective to no evident procedural gain. The extent of the exclusion is, with respect, disproportionate, a blanket exclusion. Secondly, the context of yesterday's events is critical. In those circumstances, we respectfully invite the Commission to set aside or vary the ruling of yesterday and permit Mr. McAleer to be readmitted on such proportionate and controlled basis as the Commission considers appropriate. At this point, the Commissioners withdrew briefly to consider the application. They returned quite quickly and informed us that they would reflect on the matter during the next week's break and deliver their decision on the first morning when the inquiry resumes. So that was it for today. Fingers crossed, folks, and we'll see you all soon. A small request. This podcast has grown entirely through word of mouth, people sharing episodes and listeners coming back day after day to follow the public inquiry, and I thank you for that. If you have found value in it, following the podcast on Spotify or leaving a review on Apple Podcasts makes a real difference. It helps push these conversations out beyond our own circles and into places they might not otherwise reach.